Hi everyone, I'm Gus, and I want you all to know your maps might be lying to you. So normally I like to set the stage, but in order to keep it in theme, I'm going to map the stage instead. Some maps are bad, and I want to walk through some of the reasons on why that can be. Let's start with this world map, which, while it's meant to be decorative, it's got some pretty glaring issues. Australia, Iceland, and Hawaii are all missing, along with a bunch of other weird mistakes, like the Suez Canal not existing. If we take a look at this map of the United States, it also has a few issues. Cape Cod is missing, Long Island seems to be floating away from New York State, the Upper Peninsula of Michigan is missing entirely. There's something weird going on in the DC capital region, and the Alaskan Aleutian Islands and the Florida Keys are both missing. Now, if we take a look at New Zealand, a country that's pretty well known for being left off of world maps, and we go to their government's website, it turns out that they also left themselves off the map. But this one's actually on purpose to make a joke about it, because this is from the 404 page not found, and so it would be 404 New Zealand not found. Not only are some maps bad, but even when they're good, getting the borders just right can be pretty tricky too. That's because the borders can depend on where you are, who you ask, and even if you were to ask the same person, it could depend on when you ask them. If, for example, we were to ask DataHub how much of Miami is in the United States, you might be a little surprised when they say, not all of Miami is in the United States. And it looks like that's mostly just due to some low polygon resolution. Or maybe we could ask the World Bank where the border between Peru and Ecuador is. And in this case, that gray line you see is the true border, and the blue line is what the World Bank thinks the border is. And so it looks like maybe the border's been shifted to the left a bit, and it's got a lower resolution. But you're probably thinking, the World Bank seems like a pretty important institution. Why can't they get their borders right? If we hold on to that question for a minute and hope that it's some sort of fluke and try and look at, let's say, natural Earth instead, we can see that Roosevelt Island is outside the United States. It turns out DataHub actually has this problem too, where it looks like some extra polygons that could surround the island aren't included, and it also raises the question, how far up a river do you go when trying to map out a country's borders? By now you're probably thinking, well, even though everyone else is confused about where the borders are, surely the US Department of State knows where the borders are. They do their best, but they're not perfect, like with this border between Egypt and Sudan, where you don't have two extra small countries tucked in there. But to be fair to the Department of State, this is a disputed border, so it can be helpful to know that both versions of the border exist. If we move south a little bit and look at the border between Sudan and Eritrea, it looks like the Department of State maybe has some extra resolution that the truth map doesn't have, and it looks like it's been shifted maybe up and to the left just the tiniest bit. Okay, well, what if we check an easy one, like the Vatican? I mean, they've got walls, the walls are straight lines, and they're hundreds of years old, and were built in around 850 AD, so that should be more than enough time to really go in and make sure you're getting the borders right. They actually did a pretty good job here, and while that border isn't quite perfect and does go down the middle of a road for a little bit, it's still far better than the other two examples we've seen so far. At this point you might be thinking, so what if the Department of State gets a few international borders a little bit wrong? Because surely the US Department of State knows where the United States borders are. They don't. This is the border between Mexico and Arizona, with Mexico on the left and Arizona on the right. But to their credit, they did get the 49th parallel with Canada right, probably because it's a relatively straight line. On paper, these may seem like some relatively minor problems, but in reality, they can stir up a bit of trouble. You could have property disputes, and this is exactly why people get surveys. They want to know where their borders are. It could be problems with water rights or border security, because if you've got border patrols, you want to make sure they're patrolling on the right side of the border, if you even know where your border is. So what's going wrong with all these maps? Why are all of the borders in the wrong spot? And the truth is, I haven't been entirely truthful with you guys. I've been comparing everything to the OpenStreetMap base maps, and what made those maps the true map, and who made me the arbiter of what is and isn't the true map. And I also didn't check my projections while I did check my coordinate reference systems. And I'll get into what those are more in just a minute. All that to say that if I were to take the OpenStreetMap borders and plot it against the OpenStreetMap base map, then sure enough, everything lines up and it all looks great. When we go back and compare with the Department of State borders, I do need to give them some credit, because this particular stretch of border is complicated because the original treaty that defined this border was based on the path of the river. But over time, the river has shifted. So the question becomes, is the modern day border where the river used to be when the treaty was signed, or is it where the river is now and constantly changing? Besides funky borders, you could also have a few other common problems with your maps. Like I mentioned before, you could have a problem with your projection, which is how you're choosing to represent a 3D spherical planet, sorry flat earthers, on a 2D map. Or it could be a problem with your coordinate reference system, which is how you choose to plot the points on that now 2D projection of the planet. You could also have data problems, which could be some incomplete data, or you could have extra data, maybe in the form of extra features or all versions of a disputed border, like we saw with Egypt and Sudan. You could also have incorrect or out-of-date data, some file type or data type mismatches. You could have a different data resolution between two different data sets, or you could even have fake data that map makers put in there so that if someone tries to steal their maps, they can point at this fake location in court and say, look, this isn't a real place. This person stole my map, and you can tell because they have the same fake place too. I actually came across a really great example of some incorrect data the other night when Nicole and I were walking to dinner and we'd gotten separated from the group. And so we wanted to know, where in the world is Travis Nochi? For those of you that don't know, Travis is a coworker of ours at Lander. And while we were walking, Nicole realized that she actually has Travis in Find My Friends on her phone. And so she pulled open the app. She was really excited to see that Travis was sitting in the middle of the Potomac River. Well, we wouldn't have been too surprised if Travis had made the decision to go for a sudden evening swim. It didn't seem quite right, and we did eventually find him next to the Georgetown University sign. To better illustrate how far off Travis's phone's location was from reality, I've marked his actual location with a red star on the map. Okay, yeah, maps can have a lot of problems, but now what? What can I actually do about it? Just like I found my source of truth with the OpenStreetMap base maps, you also need to find your source of truth. Every map starts with a base map, and every base map has four main features. It has a function, which could be street map, satellite view, it could be a hybrid street satellite, topographic. It has a style, which could be if it's full color, maybe it's grayscale, dark map, or it might have labels, or it could not have labels. You'll also have different data sources, which could be OpenStreetMap, the government, Mapbox, Overture Maps, and many more. And lastly, you'll have your coordinate reference system, which frequently is WGS84, but there are tons of other reference systems out there as well. When choosing your base map, it's important to go back and consider those four features. So with your function, what is it you're trying to show? With your style, is there a certain style that helps communicate the point you're trying to make? Or is there a certain way that you want to display your data to make a specific impact? When thinking about your data sources, where does your data come from? does that data provider have a base map of their own that you can use? And with the coordinate reference system, it's really important to make sure that you're matching your system to the reference system used by your data provider. When it comes to adding data, there's a lot of other things to consider as well. Your data layers could be any data of your own, maybe it's data you've collected, or maybe it could be data that you've gotten from some other provider, like borders, roads, weather patterns. It could be the migratory patterns of Canada geese, or the locations of working McDonald's ice cream machines in the Washington, D.C. area. Your data could also come in a few different formats. You can have raster layers, which are tiled images like satellite view or weather radar, and these have a specific resolution, and that's why frequently maps have to reload when you zoom in. You could also have vector layers, which are lines and polygons and sometimes images, and these are usually used to communicate borders or paths. And then you could also have UI layers like markers, pop-ups, or tooltips, some extra way to communicate information to a user, and then a bunch more other kinds of data layers as well. But Gus, you might be thinking, this is complicated and I really don't care. Yeah, that hurts, but fair enough. You don't always need super accurate locations. Like, you don't need to know where in the McDonald's the ice cream machine is located, because chances are they're not going to let you behind the counter anyways, and you really just need to know where the McDonald's itself is. You could also be looking for population centers in cities, which really only needs to come down to around a block or so radius before anything more specific just wouldn't be that helpful. You could also be using a map as a visualization where the data itself is what matters, like a chloropleth, which are those colorful polygon maps that are frequently used to illustrate voting, as well as visualizations of a region's watersheds or maybe something else. It could really be any situation where you're trying to convey some other data using the map as a platform. The important thing is just be consistent. Make sure you know what projection you're using. Same goes for your coordinate reference system. And make sure both of those match your data sources and your base map sources. Because once everything's on the same field, your borders or whatever data you're trying to plot will be in a much better spot than it would be otherwise. While some maps might be bad, all maps are lying to you. When you're making your own, do you know what you're sacrificing to communicate your message? And when you're looking at someone else's, do you know, and are you able to tell what they've sacrificed to be able to communicate theirs? And that, my friends, is how your maps might be lying to you.